Have you ever heard of the observer effect? Basically, the concept is that the act of just looking at an event or even a particle can actually change its nature. But how does this work? Well, in this episode of Metaphysical, we're going to talk about the double slit experiment, quantum physics, remote viewing, and so much more. Because when the nature of the universe starts coming into question, clearly it shows us there's a lot more to reality than any of us realized. Join remote viewer John Vivanco and me, investigative researcher Rob Counts, for a show that's out of this world.
Yeah, this is one of my favorite topics here because it's so weird.
It throws your mind for a loop, really. The double slit experiment and the observer effect are both things that even affect something like remote viewing, fortune telling, these types of things. And it's been on my mind a lot recently because
Wait, did you say fortune telling?
Fortune telling. A lot of people are crazy about psychics and fortune telling,
No,
right?
I just thought it was funny. It just was so
Yeah.
I don't know, like 1930s or something.
Yeah, but no, it's still a thing. I mean, you can ride down the street right now and there's like a psychic fortune teller hanging out that you can go to and they'll read tea leaves or whatever it is and tell you your business. And it's like sometimes some of the things they get are accurate and then other times it's just totally crazy. Like, why are they so bad at it? Like, everyone who watches those commercials on TV know that it's like most of them are con artists. So like
Right.
what's the deal with that?
Oh man, I mean, okay, outside of the double slit experiment, which we'll talk about,
Yeah.
in a little bit, I've trained tons and tons and tons and tons of people in remote viewing. One of the biggest things that I find as far as a hindrance in remote viewing is when a person believes that they are a good psychic and they've been doing psychic work for a while. When they get to remote viewing, they have to dismantle all their ideas about themselves and how to go about things. And if they don't do that, then they can't really do it very well. And they get very frustrated by that because they think, well, I'm a good psychic. By far, over everything else, the biggest limiting factor for people are the beliefs that they have about how it's supposed to work.
That's really interesting. So like notions that you have about how the world works, how you work, who you are, you actually have to throw out. It's like ego death in a way, which is a cool.
It is. Yeah.
Yeah. Like you have to practice that and then you get clarity over time. And this is why I think it's cool that anyone could do this. It's not like you have to be a, sensitive psychic or something like that.
Their expectations are going to ruin them, though. Ultimately, their expectations are going to ruin them in remote viewing.
Right. Right. And I also think it's really interesting how some of these concepts, like you can talk about this pseudoscience stuff all day long, but then when it starts to intersect with modern physics and stuff, and we've got guys doing things like the double slit experiment, the concept out there is that a particle is this solid, almost piece of matter. But what they're saying is like actually particles exist in waves until you observe them, and then they're a solid circular or like whatever this idea that people have. And I mean, what is the double slit experiment, and what's your take on this, John?
Yeah, I mean, everything you're talking about is what they discovered in the double slit experiment. So if you imagine, to simplify it, get away from electrons and photons and those types of matter. Just think about like balls, bits of matter as balls, like marbles. Like you've got a marble gun, for instance, right? It just shoots marbles. And in front of it, you put a board with one slit in it. Okay. You shoot the marbles at it, and marbles are going to go through that slit. They're going to hit the wall behind it and just make these little dots, right? That's all they're going to do, just little dots. Okay. So now put two slits together and shoot the marbles at it. You would expect them to just make two rows of dots on the back wall, dot, 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 right? In physics, when you get to electrons, little tiny bits of matter that are like marbles, what happens instead is that it forms what's called an interference pattern on the back wall of multiple lines, of more than two lines, where the balls are not only pieces of matter, but they're also a wave. They form also as a wave function, and they begin to cancel each other out on the edges because they're interfering with each other, right? And so you have many, many, many lines on the back wall, all like fading out, getting brighter. And so this notion, this idea that something, a piece of matter that is physical, can be both a particle and a wave at the same time is a confounding notion, because in our world, in our three-dimensional reality, we place the physical as it either is this way or it is that way. It cannot be two ways at once, right? It cannot be two ways at once. And so this is the issue. Now, when you get into spiritual stuff, when you get into meditation, meditating long enough where you begin to open up to you being everything at once and at the same time an individual, this is no different than the double slit experiment, where dualistic notions fade away. In a sense, the double slit experiment and spiritual practices, going in depth into them in your life, are the same thing, where you step outside of duality. But in the double slit experiment, you are watching non-dualistic nature at work. Now, here's the really crazy part, though, about the double slit experiment. When you put a measuring device or the observer to see exactly what those particles are doing, what are they doing? Why are they turning into a wave and a particle at the same time? The wave function collapses. It disappears when you bring that observer into it. And then it goes into just showing the dots on the wall, two lines of particles hitting the wall through the slits. This is probably, for a lot of people, the creepiest part. Why is that happening? What is it that an observer brings? It's an instrument or somebody observing, consciousness observing. Why would that collapse the wave function? So we're getting into this crazy quantum world when it comes to the double slit experiment and quantum mechanics and all these hypothetical, theoretical things that people throw out there to explain why this is happening are still only just theories, because most people are trying to fit this to the dualistic world, right? The how could it be a particle and wave at the same time? But then taking that step further, it's impossible to explain in with language in normal human terms, maybe through math, why the observer collapses the wave function, right? But we see this all the time in remote viewing, right? So here we are, like when we get into these more esoteric type practices, which remote viewing is a part of, we begin to see these aspects of collapsing the wave function. So for instance, with remote viewing, just the act of what we call tasking a remote viewer on something collapses the wave function. For instance, most people think in a linear process. You go from point A to point B, right? We go through time in a linear way. It's not so with remote viewing, right? So for instance, I can do remote viewing sessions. I can do a whole bunch of remote viewing sessions that are not tasked on anything. I can wait years before they're tasked on something. They're just sitting in a pile. This is like Schrodinger's cat, right? Where this remote viewing session exists in a state of probability until you collapse its wave function by tasking it. And it doesn't have to be in a linear way. I don't have to I'm going to write down the remote viewing tasking, then I'm going to give it to the remote viewer, and then I'm going to give feedback. It doesn't have to work that way. It's not non-linear system. Any nonlinear system like this is collapsing a wave function while something is existing in a state of probability, right? Until that time you want to collapse it. And we'll get into this stuff later on, but it goes much deeper and crazier than just that.
This is really paradoxical in a really interesting way. And I keep thinking of the story of Moses, right? If the Pharaoh hadn't heard what his fate was going to be, he never would have changed what he was doing, tried to kill all of the children. Moses escaped, and then Moses came back and took over anyway. It
Right.
And there's multiple stories, like historical stories like this, where when someone heard their fate from the oracle, they went to change their fate. And then it ended up blowing up in their face, and the exact same thing happened as well. And it's like, those things are just like paradoxical, mind
Yeah.
boggling things, right? And in
Right.
this case, it's like you're trying to see something, an event that is like maybe it is in wave form, but as soon as you put your mind on it, it becomes a solid thing or something. And now it has actually changed the constitution of that particular event.
Right. I
And
mean, think of remote viewers. Like people think that remote viewers are like these disinterested anthropologists that are hidden and watching something without affecting it. But that's not the case. It doesn't matter what it is, whether it's past, present, or future. When a remote viewer steps in, they begin to affect things.
look, is it worth then remote viewing that thing? Because it's going to, like, now you're adding in variables to an already complex, you know,
I
uh
know. I know, man. Like, am I destroying universes? That's the thing I always ask myself. Like, am I totally screwing up? And when I die, I'm going to be in hell for a while
well,
because of all the universes destroyed.
no, I mean, scientists would probably like, I mean, they're blowing particles up all the time and they don't
I
even know
know.
what those are, right? Observing, I don't think is like some kind of sin in and of itself, but depends on what it is.
Here's a for instance. Take Skinny Bob. The old
The alien
video,
guy, right?
the alien guy. The video supposedly comes from the 1940s,
Yeah.
1950s. Okay, so in remote viewing that to understand if it was real or not, we found out it was real, obviously, because we've talked about Skinny Bob in the show before. Skinny Bob is in the past to us. Yet when we remote view Skinny Bob starts communicating and is fully aware of us. Us
Wait.
from
Like his past self in whatever state, or we're talking about
Yeah,
Skinny
we're
Bob
talking
still
about his
alive
past
somewhere?
self, right? Because we remote viewed the incident where he is in the film and what he's doing, right? To understand if that is real. And so in remote viewing that, Skinny Bob recognizes us in that quantum realm coming in, right? We're not anthropologists that are hiding in the trees, right? Skinny Bob recognizes us and starts communicating with us and starts to get annoyed with us because we keep coming in, because I keep sending remote viewers in and he's like, just get out of here, get out of my hair, right? What hair he doesn't have. And so he's basically aware, even though he's in the 1940s for us. And so that's the thing. See, remote viewing is not a three-dimensional thing. It's a multi-dimensional thing where time doesn't exist, only consciousness.
Dude, that whole thing is like, this is mind-blowing stuff. The idea that I can't you can't even imagine that, right? Like, that time is not a linear thing, because, and I want to get into this in the next episode. In the next episode, you guys, we're going to actually be talking about the most difficult things to remote view. So on the ground, whether they be future events or events going on right now or whatever they are, and we're going to give you solid examples. We'll give you a few examples in this episode as well, but we wanted to have more of a zoomed out conversation about these
Right.
things and the observer effect, because they're so interesting and paradoxical and confusing, I think. Because, humans, they think in this linear way, right? That happened in the past, this happened today, X will happen in the future, hopefully, whatever. But maybe they're not as linear as we think. Maybe they're somehow in some dimensions one and the same.
We've developed this very structured physical apparatus in order to move through whatever this is in a way that keeps this physicalness, whatever you want to call it, persisting for as long as possible. Like this is its own mind, this is its own function, this body. And this thing is the thing that is the predominant driver in this reality, not the multidimensional world, not at least from our everyday operating perspective, our operating system, if you would call it. And so this is the thing that has to be taken care of first and foremost. at least what people think. They think that, at least. I don't necessarily think that. I think differently. That thing only operates in a linear space because this is born and this is going to die. This is going to be born. It's going to go through sickness, health, old age, and death. And it's a linear progression. It doesn't go backwards. When you get out of this realm, everything can go backwards. It doesn't matter because that thing doesn't exist there. And that's where remote viewing is. And so the skill that we learn with remote viewing is a fourth dimensional, fifth dimensional skill, right? Where ideas of constraints in the physical don't exist. And one of the biggest things you have to break people out of is applying their physical constructs to the act of remote viewing.
Are you liking this episode so far? We're not even halfway through.
Once you step outside of the physical constructs, you begin to understand how remote viewing works a lot better. And part of that is the observer effect.
We covered parapsychological experimentation and telepathy experiments. They found multiple times that people using their mind intent on these things did have an effect on the end outcome of where the numbers would land. We covered CIA studies and teleportation proof in studies. They would have a fly or something in a jar, and then they would teleport it out of the jar. And this was all through these experiments with, more sensitive and capable people than the average person, of course. Plus psychological operations, ESP or extrasensory perception, and why John won't remote view abduction experiences.
There have been times where people have wanted me to view things, and I say, no, I'm not going to view it. Absolutely not. The moment that my mind steps in, those things look at me.
To watch the rest of this episode on the observer effect, remote viewing, and time anomalies, click on the link in the description to subscribe to the Metaphysical.tv. The Mystery Junkie tier gets you access to all our exclusive video podcast episodes. Your support means we can keep doing these deep dives, and it also means we can design more merch and make more awesome products like our Metaphysical coffee, which you can get delivered every month with our super fan tier. Thanks so much for your support, and we hope you thought this episode was as out of this world as we did.